This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Hone, and it's Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. This time around, I'm looking at what Wizards R&D calls Impulsive Draw, an effect that Wizards came up with to give red a way to get card advantage, but it still feels red and flavorful and different from the ways that other colors draw cards. The name Impulsive Draw comes from the Magic 2015 card Act on Impulse, a card that lets you exile the top 3 cards of your library and you can play them until the end of your turn. This effectively extends the hand of the player who casts it, but only for a single turn. After that, the cards are of course permanently in exile and can't be played. My definition for Impulsive Draw is a little bit different than the one Mark Rosewater outlined in a tweet in 2017. This is because over the last few years, it has become clear that this original ability that was only limited to a single turn has been expanded to include until the end of your next turn. And sometimes we also see the effect with various other requirements. To qualify for this list, a card had to exile cards from either your library or your opponent's, and then you can play those cards, but only until the end of your turn or the end of your next turn, or if some condition is met. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Players Tour, or Mythic Championship top 8 is worth 2 points, as are Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest top 8 is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is the first of 3 Chandras to make the list. This one is Chandra Artisan. This Chandra actually has 2 Impulsive Draw abilities. She has a +1 that lets you exile the top card of your library and you can play that card until the end of your turn, and she has a -7 that lets you do the same thing, only with 7 cards. One thing to note here is that because the effect says you can play the cards, it also includes lands. Some other versions of this effect that we'll see only let you play spells, as we'll see elsewhere on this list. In addition to her Impulsive Draw effects, Chandra Artisan also has a nice static ability. She damages your opponent or one of their planeswalkers anytime she loses loyalty counters. This includes if they are removed by your opponent damaging her, and it also includes using her ultimate, which may as well also have the text does 7 damage to your opponent. The static ability here means that even if you play Chandra in a subpar situation where you can't really protect her, she will at least manage to have an impact on the opponent's life total in most cases. If you can protect her though, she basically draws you a bunch of extra cards, and that's pretty great. She's been played in red aggro decks in both Standard and Pioneer. At number 9, it's another red Planeswalker, but this one isn't Chandra, it's Luca, Coppercoat Outcast. Luca has one of the more permanent Impulsive Draw effects since his +1 exiles 3 cards from your library, and then he lets you play any creatures from among them as long as you have a Luca Planeswalker in play. If your deck is really creature dense, it isn't unusual for Luca to basically give you 2 or 3 extra cards on some turns, and that's pretty insane. Of course, he does need to survive for you to take advantage of the ability in most cases, and he doesn't have an excellent way to protect himself. His -2 does let you upgrade one of your creatures, but it isn't really netting you a creature to protect him. His ultimate is nice too, as it turns your presumably creature-heavy board into what is typically lethal damage. Luca was being played in Fires of Invention decks in Standard, as the extra cards he gave you could give you more options of stuff to cast with Fires, and his -2 could search up some really scary stuff, but that deck ultimately got banned, and Luca doesn't have a new home yet. At number 8, it is Escape to the Wilds, which exiles 5 cards that you can play until the end of your next turn. It also lets you play an additional land the turn you play it, and that's nice, because chances are good you'll hit at least 1 land with it, so it is very doable to play all the lands you reveal over a couple of turns after you play Escape to the Wilds. Playing that extra land also makes it more likely you can cast all the cards you exile too. It's been played in Adventure decks in Standard, which are very reliant on getting Lucky Clover or Edgewall Innkeeper in play. The Wilds can help you find them, but it also plays well with Adventures in general. Revealing Adventures from the top of your library with Escape to the Wilds, like Bonecrusher Giant, means you can pay for the cheaper adventure cost and still hold on to the Bonecrusher Giant for later in the game. Adventure decks haven't been played a lot as of late, but Escape to the Wilds might not be done. At number 7, I have Vance's Blasting Cannons, a double-faced card that starts out as a legendary enchantment that exiles the top card of your library each turn. and you can cast that card during the turn it was exiled. Because this one says cast, that means you can't play lands with it. Like all impulsive draw effects, this helps make sure that red decks can continue to draw gas if the game goes late. In addition to that, the cannons can transform into Spitfire Bastion if you cast 3 or more spells in a single turn, and the Bastion is no joke, capable of doing 3 damage at a time to creatures or players. That's something that can really win games for you. And obviously, the exile effect makes it more likely that you can cast 3 spells in a turn, since you'll have an extra card each turn. The cannons were played in red aggro decks while it was in standard. At number 6, it is Robber of the Rich. I considered for a while whether I wanted to include this as an impulsive draw effect since it doesn't exile a card from your library. It exiles one from your opponent's library, assuming that they have more cards in hand than you do. However, I eventually decided that because the effect is temporary and also has a requirement, it is close enough to an impulsive draw effect to be here. Flavorfully enough, the robber will only steal something for you if your opponent is richer than you. In other words, they have more cards in their hand. Additionally, a rogue has to attack for you to gain access to the card. Obviously, the turn it gets exiled, you'll be able to cast it because the robber is a rogue, but to gain access to cards it exiled on subsequent turns, you have to attack with a rogue again. One nice thing about this is that even if the robber dies, other rogues attacking later in the game still give you access to the card he exiled. The robber has been played in standard aggro decks, with red deck wins being its most common home, but it's also played in Rakdos and Gruul aggro. It seems likely that it will continue to gain points going forward. At number 5, it is Abbot of Corral Keep, which is actually tied with Robber of the Rich in total points, but the Abbot has one more Pro Tour top 8, so I gave it the edge. The Abbot does the impulsive draw thing as an enter the battlefield effect. The Abbot is another version of this effect that lets you play lands, which is nice. If at all possible, it's usually best to play the Abbot before you play a land, so that you can reap the benefits of whatever you hit. In addition to the nice enter the battlefield trigger, the Abbot also happens to be a 2-mana 2/1 with prowess, which is a pretty nice stat line for a card that effectively draws you a card most of the time. Like a lot of the cards on this list, the Abbot has mostly been played in red aggro decks. You generally need a very low curve for the Abbot to be at its best, because the lower your curve is, the more likely you can take advantage of the card he exiles. In Standard, it was played in mono-red, blue-red, and red-green aggro decks. More recently, it's begun to be played in Pioneer variants of red deck wins, so it probably isn't done putting up points. At number 4, it is Outpost Siege, a card very similar to Vance's Blasting Cannons, but it's the older of the two of them, and has also been more successful. Outpost Siege may not be able to transform into a powerful land, but it has a couple of things going on that Blasting Cannons don't. First, you can actually play lands with it, which means most turns you're going to be able to do something with the card that you exile. Second, it has some corner case upside, where you actually choose the Dragons option. Most of the time that's not what you do, but every now and then there's a board state where your opponent might be able to survive by blocking all of your creatures, but if each of them is doing 1 to your opponent when they die, they can no longer survive. So that option actually does come up from time to time. The Siege was played in a wide variety of decks in Standard, including traditional aggro, but it was also played in mid-range and control decks as a nice source of card advantage. So far, it doesn't have any points outside of Standard. At number 3, it is Light Up the Stage. For 3 mana, it lets you exile the top 2 cards of your library, and you can play either of those cards until the end of your next turn. That's not the most amazing deal there is. It's kind of like a red divination, and it's highly unlikely you'll be able to use the cards you get on turn 3 when you cast it for 3 mana, and you may not be able to use them on your next turn either. But as a result of the Spectacle alternate cost, most of the time, Light Up the Stage is cast for only a single mana, which is an amazing deal. It effectively becomes a 1-mana draw 2 spell if you can set it up, and setting it up is not a big challenge in red decks, which tend to damage their opponent every turn anyway. Light Up the Stage has been a big part of what has made red aggro decks good and Standard lately, and it has also been played in Pioneer red deck wins and in Modern Prowess. At number 2, it is Chandra Pyromaster. She has a 0 loyalty ability that does the impulsive draw thing, which means she can be a source of card advantage every turn. She also, of course, comes with other abilities, including a +1 that lets you damage a creature and your opponent and makes the creature it damages unable to block, and an ultimate that lets you cast the best instant or sorcery card in the top 7 cards of your library 3 times at no mana cost. As a source of card advantage, Chandra has been pretty widely played on both of her trips through Standard, including in the decks you'd expect, like various red aggro builds, but she was even played in decks like Devotion to Green, where she doesn't help your devotion at all, and that does a good job of explaining how good she was. She has also been played in modern Jund decks and has a single point from a mono-red prison deck in Legacy. She doesn't have any points since 2018 though. And at number 1, probably not surprising very many people, it's Chandra Torch of Defiance. Though she's only been around for a few years, this Chandra has proven to be one of the better planeswalkers we've ever seen. Her +1 gives you an impulsive draw effect with a bit of a spin on it. You can't play lands that you hit with it, but you do get to do 2 damage to your opponent if you don't play the card, so you always get something out of it. She also has a +1 that can ramp, a -3 that can kill most creatures, and a -7 that makes all your spells insanely powerful. She was ubiquitous in Standard, and that has gone a long way towards giving her such a massive score. She picked up 154 points in that format alone, seeing play in the various vehicle and energy decks, as well as red aggro decks like Ramunap Red and Rakdos Aggro. However, she's also been played in Modern, Legacy, Pioneer, and Vintage, indicating that she is nowhere near done adding to her score. In Pioneer, she is, predictably enough, played in red deck wins. In Modern, she has gained points in Jund, Temur Aggro, and Izzet Phoenix decks. In Legacy, all of her points have come in Dragon Stompy, and in Vintage, her 2 points came in a Blue Moon deck. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you see future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you need to catch up on the MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.